Okay, welcome everyone. Really excited to be here. We are kicking off the second part of the series of talking about transformation and about purpose. So we had a really cool week with a bunch of really exciting participants and panelists. And this is the second one in the same series where we're going to be talking about how to turn corporate purpose into action. We kind of already started touching on some of those things last week, hearing from the likes of representatives of IKEA and a bunch of other companies to hear how they're doing these things. And today we're going to go into a little bit more detail on the action part of that. So just to introduce myself, I'm Annika. I'm going to be moderating this event today. And just to mention, we want to make this event as interactive as possible. So you can probably see on the right-hand side of your screen, there is a chat space where you can submit questions. You can ask questions for the panelists throughout the event, and we'll keep track of them. And at the end, when we are doing the panel, we're going to make sure that we kind of surface the right questions and reference you guys. So please keep track of the chat and kind of submit stuff as we go along. The same is true for a poll. So there's also a poll functionality, which we're going to sort of switch live in a moment, where we can ask you questions. And there's two polls we've got prepared for you, where we'd love to hear your opinion and kind of get you involved. Furthermore, there's for you an opportunity to get involved in the kind of social sphere. So there's don't forget to tweet and tag any kind of interesting things you've learned today or any kind of comments you had. The kind of different handles are on screen for you right there. And also, obviously, at the end, we're going to share some more details for how you can get in touch with us. So we've got some really exciting speakers for you today. This is kind of the agenda that we've got prepared. First of all, the introduction, that's what's happening to you right now. So this is me, Annika. I'm a business design director at Idean. So what that actually means is that I'll get involved in the work that we do to make sure, and this is going to sound really sad, but basically to make sure we create business value. The value that we create can also be interpreted as other things than just making money. And I think that's what I'm quite passionate about as well. But in any case, I get really excited about developing new services and new products. And so obviously I'm really excited about hearing today how this can be done in a way that is good for the planet and people. Going on from that, we're going to be hearing from Lubo Miller, who's a really entrepreneur from Berlin, working in the sustainability. We're going to be hearing from Will Kirkpatrick, who's part of the O2 leadership team, particularly in their corporate responsibility and sustainability area. Then we're going to hear from our very own Payal Watwa, our service design practice, so our service design champion in-house. She's going to be sharing some thoughts. And then we're going to be hearing from Dr. Nazia, and she is incredibly impressive in terms of her track record. She is kind of representative of Cambridge University and also a fellow of the World Economic Forum. So she's going to be joining us at the end in the panel that we're going to be having. So we're going to have a little bit of a quick intro to her later then, and then we're going to jump into the panel. So moving on, I hope this is not too fast for you guys, but I thought I thought it would be more fun to kind of get to the meat of the evening as soon as possible. So just to quickly introduce Idean and who we are. So we are a design agency. We combine design, business, and technology to create new products and services that are good for the people on the planet. So we have, particularly in the recent year, really doubled down on our efforts to do more planet-centric design. So we've got several working groups in the business to make sure that we win more of that kind of work. We're really excited and motivated by the idea of making sure what we create and what we design and put out in the world is going to make a positive difference. So what we've also come across is in doing that work is a lot of the challenges that we see big corporates face to kind of putting some of those lofty aspirations into action. And so today, hopefully we'll get to hear a couple more about, like, a couple of tricks or some recommendations for how that could happen, how we can kind of make sure that some of these goals are put into action and kind of bring about the future that we hope for ourselves and our children. So in terms of what that means for us is that we believe offsetting isn't good enough. So we can obviously see that some big corporates are trying to, make good some of the errors of the past in terms of like offsetting their emissions or doing other activities like that. But we believe that actually sustainable change is only going to be possible if organizations change how they operate from the inside out. So transforming from the core and thinking about different ways of running their businesses and also setting different goals and incentives for the people within their organizations. So this is one of the reasons why actually we are running this series, because we want to share more of our aspirations and dreams and exchange thoughts and hear from experts in this space about how this is done well and how we can kind of spread the word and make this happen in more businesses out there. So last week we heard from Hege from IKEA. We heard from our very own James Haycock, and also from James Nettleton and Zoe Legrand. We had a really interesting discussion where, like I said, we kind of already started to veer into the space of what kind of actions really need to be taken to make some of these sustainable purposes really come to life and to come to fruition. I think one thing that really stuck with me that I was really impressed from what we heard from Hege from IKEA is how in their organization they have made sustainability part of the role description and title of most of their senior leadership team, to make sure that that is not something that kind of is done off the side of the desk, but actually is becoming a more central and outspoken part of their agenda and kind of how they measure their success and goals. Another thing that I thought was quite impactful for me is what Zoe mentioned around how actually the last couple of months has shown us how globally people, businesses, and also government can mobilize to make a huge amount of change in a short amount of time. So that kind of has filled me with hope, and it's also the perfect segue for this slide here. Essentially, what we have seen is that the current estimates of the sort of expected global government spending on sustainable development goals by 2030 is around $33 trillion, which I was first like, wow, that seems like a lot of money. And then I took a look at how much money is actually currently being spent on COVID measures. So up until June, this is like one of the numbers we found, roughly $10 trillion have been spent purely on by like some of the biggest governments around the world on kind of COVID measures. So for some countries out there, it's been even up to like roughly 40% of their GDP spend, and that even though the economies around the world have obviously been quite struggling under the strain of COVID. So just looking at these numbers, it kind of makes me feel in a way optimistic about the fact that actually once people really understand the importance of change and changing a situation, actually things can kick into action. Obviously, ideally this wouldn't happen too late. So that's, I think, the challenge that we have, like making sure that some of these long-term gradual effects of climate change are actually turned into action today and not down the line when it's actually already too late to really action them. But I thought that these numbers were quite interesting, just to kind of show actually maybe those 33 trillion is not enough. And also if you look at once, the pain is really, can be felt around the world of real problems facing humanity, actually some of these figures that can be mobilized in quite a short amount of time is kind of a refreshing way of looking at the world. So, which brings me to my last section before I start to introduce our first speaker, which is the poll. So this time we'd love to ask you, which purposeful action should your organization focus on first in 2021? So we'd love to hear from you. We've kind of prepared some answers for you that you can just kind of multiple choice select from. As soon as you have answered the poll, you can also see the results and see what other people have answered, and kind of it'll update over time as people answer. So please take some time to fill in the poll. And also, again, like I mentioned, if you have any questions, if you want to kind of like dig deeper, if you feel like you want to challenge the speakers with any more detail, please throw it into the chat and we can pick up on that in a bit. So, right. So I think what I'll do now is I will stop sharing my screen and start introducing our first speaker of the evening, which is Lyubomila Jordanova. And she is the founder and CEO of Plan A. And it's a Berlin-based startup developing an algorithm to predict where and how climate change will hit hardest. And I think the exciting thing is also that they've actually developed some software which can help businesses reduce their emissions. We'll hear all about that from Jordanova, from Lyubomila, sorry.
You can keep it formal if you want.
Sorry, I don't know, too many different names. So I'm gonna just sort of disappear in the background. And I'll pop up once Lyubomila has done her thing and introduce the next speaker. So bye from me for now. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Annika, for the introduction, and I'm incredibly excited to be here and to share also why in Plan A we also believe that offsetting is not enough. I'm going to tell you a story and also give a bit of a perspective on why I believe that sustainability and climate change should be the main topics of businesses going forward if they want to be successful. So please let me know if you see my screen being shared. If someone can say, yeah, thank you. Fantastic. So my journey started a lot before 2017, but something fundamental happened in 2017. I decided to go on a surfing trip. Many of you might have done this previously, but maybe you didn't see exactly what I ended up seeing in Morocco. These were the beaches where supposedly people had to enjoy themselves and make the most of nature. That also was allowing people economically to benefit from its beauty and its features. At that point of time, I was not at all a capable surfer. So what I ended up doing at the moment when the big waves were there was that I started collecting trash. I was a bit shocked by the quantity that I was seeing. So first thing that I was able to do, I found a big plastic bag and unfortunately was able to find multiple more to then be able to collect within an hour pairs of shoes, burnt plastic bottles, glass bottles, and also, unfortunately, a lot of construction materials and different evidences of human existence. At that point of time, my knowledge about climate change was as big as this dot. I was a finance professional working in fintech, previously investment banking in London, nothing to do with climate change whatsoever. And I ended up feeling quite disappointed that I was so far away from this whole topic and my life was so detached from it. So I ended up doing what many of us do when we go on an explorative journey. I decided to educate myself. I bought a lot of books. I watched a lot of TED videos. I also signed up for some pop magazines. And I found different evidences that kind of pushed me to find three particular focus areas of this investigation. The first one was that businesses were the key to address climate change. Why? Because they were in charge of 70% of the emissions on our planet, and they were also the ones that were moving the fastest. The second aspect was that climate change science should have been the source of knowledge and solutions, but it wasn't. There was a lot of evidence out there, but scientists seemed to be shouting in the desert, at least based on what movement on the topic was in 2017. And finally, there was a need for a collaborative approach, also mentioned by Annika. The size of the exercise that we need to go through to enable our world to become more sustainable is so big that it requires different stakeholders to align in order to be effective and in order for us to be able to get to at least 2 degrees increase, which is kind of what we're not on track of at the moment. We're rather at 3 degrees. So we ended up deciding to build something that is helpful for companies. We built a software that enables companies to calculate, monitor, and reduce their emissions. We also developed an algorithm that predicts where and how climate change will hit the hardest. Don't worry, I have a lot of scientists on my team, so you don't put this kind of exercises in the hands of only a financier. And we ended up using a lot of data that is out there, a lot of evidence that was out there helping us find a path that was really effective and tangibly supporting companies with these big challenges. We also have a community called the Green Tech Alliance, which has more than 500 green tech startups and 350 advisors. And these are just some nice statistics about what we've been doing. But today I'm here to tell you a bit more about why I believe sustainability is the biggest opportunity for businesses worldwide. For the 4 years that we've been working with hundreds of companies, we have been able to actually identify multiple sources of reasoning why you should consider this topic to be an important one for yourself. And I'm going to tell you a bit about the lessons that we've learned. Lesson number one, your team cares. Maybe you don't see how sustainability matters at the moment, but actually, if you speak to a lot of your employees, you'll find out that they're quite concerned and they want you to represent their values as well. This is here an event that we organized with the biggest food delivery company in Berlin, and which got followed because it was super successful. This is some of the evidence of the exercise. It's quite gruesome. And this is the second event that we organized, where after the first one, all of a sudden the attendees got to 200. We couldn't even fit them on the photo. And the collection was a bit bigger. The second reason that is incredibly important, and I think for those of you that work, regardless if you work with businesses or you work in a B2C format, you might be noticing already that the revenue coming from sustainable products could be increasing significantly. Here's another cleanup. We do like to clean parks, even though we are a software company. Here is another cleanup we organized with Tier Mobility as well as with Decathlon and a university in Berlin, where we had more than 700 people just passing by, and because they were quite concerned about the level of dirtiness in Berlin, they decided to jump in. What ended up happening, as we found out from statistics later, was that many of these companies that we partnered up with ended up benefiting financially from this. There was a way in which we were tracking the results from this activity, and it ended up leading to actually a lot of new clients signing up for these companies. This is an example that is outside of the spectrum of like planning created evidence, but it's something that I think relates to all of us. All of us wear clothes. You might not consider yourself as a fashion kind of a fashion person or someone that follows that, but this is an interesting movement that has happened over the last 1.5 years. These are just the labels that have been created by companies that are quite well known for fast fashion to show their commitment to sustainability. And the reason for this was that there's been a lot of boycotting of certain brands purely because of the fact that they had been exposed for the bad conditions in which their employees were working, or because there was all of a sudden a lot of evidence on what does it mean to actually wear plastic on your, on your body, like polyester, versus actually using organic. This is another reason why people have shied away from buying as much fast fashion as before. This is a jeans factory. It's a photo from Greenpeace that shows the conditions in which our jeans become the color that we kind of think is the color they've been born with, but actually they've been treated to get it. Lesson number 3, your future employees care as well. So, you might think this is the same as the first one. Well, no, because your employees have signed up for your company maybe before sustainability was on their map. But actually, something that was really interesting and is the biggest study that was ever done on the topic. It was by Peakon, which is a well-known agency. They interviewed close to 1 million people to ask them what drives them to particularly choose a company if they're switching jobs. And the first and only reason that was mentioned was sustainability. And of course, like equality came after and so on. Lesson number 4, there's a financial returns attached if you decide to work on a sustainability topic. This is an article cover from the New York Times just from a few weeks ago, which actually proved that the impact investments outperformed traditional bets in the coronavirus crisis, which wasn't so perceived to be so previously before 2020. Finally, and I would think most importantly, is the planet and humanity need it. If it's not about the financial returns, if you really want to be sold on what the big problem is, well, climate change, I guess, is what we're going to be talking about tonight a lot, and sustainability is kind of the response to it. But we already have enough evidence to know that the planet really needs support so that its health get to be improved. This is a photo of the Pacific patch, the plastic patch in the Pacific Ocean, a little tiny proportion with a lot of tiny little choices that humans have been making one after the other, which shows actually how much impact we have even as individuals. This is something that happened just 2 weeks ago, the Hurricane Iota, that unfortunately is still visible with its repercussions in Honduras. And these as you can see, a lot of people got displaced, and kind of cars are not even visible or barely visible in this photo. Finally, and with this I finish, this topic is going to become more and more important going forward. And I resonate with a lot of the messages that were shared in the presentation before. We have very limited amount of time to respond in a manner that requires a lot of coordination, a lot of understanding about your status on the topic at the moment, and also a lot of honest honest response in terms of facing the facts. So thank you so much for the opportunity to tell you a bit more about what we do in Berlin, and I look forward to speaking at the panel later tonight and hearing from the other speakers.
Thank you so much, Luamilla. It's really interesting to hear. I think particularly what you were just talking about in terms of this mattering a lot to employees. Sorry, I'm going to turn off my video because I'm green and stripy. I'll come back in a second. But essentially, I think it's really important to actually hear also what that means for teams and for employees, and also like for actually perhaps future employees that you want to win. This is definitely a topic that is becoming much more important for to win talent. So I think this is the moment I'm going to start introducing the next speaker, and we can then pummel Luamilla with more questions in a moment in the panel. But I'd like to introduce Will Kirkpatrick for now. He is part of the leadership team at O2 in their corporate responsibility and sustainability area. And he's actually recently led a shift from social impact to environmental kind of impact in their CSR strategy. So perhaps we can learn from him how to get big organizations to take action and like shift course. Obviously, it seems like he's got a track record of that. So thank you very much, Will. I'd like to hand over to you now.
Thank you very much for the intro. Right, I will skip through. So we are to the third slide, probably.
Brilliant.
So I talked about the launch date of O2, and we launched that mobile was essential to life. This was an insight that came out of research from a respondent in Qual, and we always wanted to be more than about minutes and texts. And as they used to be called units, I don't know if anybody remembers that. Minutes were called units pre O2, and we wanted to play a bigger role in the world. And so if we move forwards to the next slide, you know, doing the right thing has always been very much essential to O2 and part of our DNA. So just some of the things that we've done, if we look back from our history, back in 2012, we launched our Think Big Blueprint. And for people, that included a goal to help 1 million young people with skills and opportunities within their communities. This was at a period when David Cameron urged us to hug a hoodie, and we faced a big unemployment crisis. And we went on to launch a big work skills platform with Bauer Media. And today, that platform hosts lots of work opportunities from some of the UK's biggest household brands. So that's been a real success. 5 years ago, we realized that parents were really struggling with online safety and how to parent in a digital world. and we launched a partnership with the NSPCC, and they brought their expertise in child safeguarding, and we brought our tech know-how, and that's been a hugely successful partnership. We've helped parents to take, we've measured 7.4 million actions to keep their kids safe online, and this year we won our 19th award, which was great. Diversity and part of our responsible business focus as well, and we've championed this internally with O2. We've currently got a majority female to male ratio on the board. We were one of the first to launch extended paid paternity leave for new fathers, and we've done other really interesting initiatives like transitioning at work toolkits, and we have some really bold ambitions around gender and ethnicity representation right the way across our business. On planet as well, we've really led our sector in a number of instances. So we were the first and the longest standing phone recycling scheme with O2 Recycle, and that saved 450 tons of tech from landfill, and 95% of phones that we recycle go back into reuse, and we have a zero landfill policy for any that we can't refurb and resell. We also realized that there was a huge issue with the millions of chargers that were being sold in every new phone pack. And so we created this initiative called Charger Out of the Box, where we worked with our peers in the telco sector and with the manufacturers to remove chargers from new phone sales. And the last thing I wanted to mention in terms of the history is the work that we've done to reduce carbon chain. So we were one of 3 companies worldwide to receive the highest certification from the Carbon Trust for the work that we do to reduce carbon in our supply chain. And that's something that we've really been getting on with behind the scenes and is very much part of our procurement and supply chain process. So just a few things I wanted to call out to highlight our track record on responsible business. If we could move on, please. And we've always said that doing good is good for business, but that really has never been more true than it is today. And Mark Carney said last year that a business without a sustainability plan doesn't have a plan. And why is that? Well, you don't need me to tell you about what's going on with Black Lives Matter, with COVID, and of course, the escalating climate crisis and the extreme weather. Lou Miller captured some of those in her last presentation. And so we have a moral obligation to do more, but there's also a really growing business case, which is, helping to galvanize action, not just in O2, but across the business community. So if you take climate change, concern around climate change is no longer something just for the generation Greta. It's gone mainstream. And, brands that are lagging in this area will be punished, and brands that are doing well, there is a great opportunity for them. Of course, we have a broader range of stakeholders as well. If we take investors, we've seen this massive growth in ESG investment, and it's expected that there's going to be a doubling of investment in ethical investing this year. We of course have a big focus from policymakers, and we have COP26 next year, which is hugely exciting, and that's important for us to sort of be able to open the door to number 10, and also to questions of policy and regulation. And press, it's important topic in the press almost daily. So from a reputational point of view, there's a risk and an opportunity that we need to manage. And of course, again, as Luba Miller said, the employees, it's a growing way for us to attract talent, motivate talent. A big growing business case, and as I said, it's really where the moral case meets the business case. so we can move forward. And I'll talk a little bit about our plan. So we have a responsible business plan called the Blueprint, which I mentioned we first launched in 2012. And this year we took a conscious decision to increase the focus on climate change. So we have a goal to build a greener future and to become a net zero business and to offer mobile and digital innovation to power a lower carbon world. But the plan also has breadth, and we have material issues that we need to look after around society. So online safety, digital well-being, data privacy, but also digital inclusion. And a staggering 11 million people in the UK don't have access to internet connectivity. And one scheme that we've launched recently called Community Calling seeks to address that, where we're looking to get phones and free data into the hands of some of the most vulnerable people across the UK. And our third pillar is leading by example, and that really covers what we do internally to make sure that we have the right business principles and practices, and that we're building an inclusive and ethical business. Okay, so back in March, we launched our net zero targets. So on net zero, our target is to be a net zero business by 2025. And we also have a goal to reduce carbon in our supply chain by 30% also by 2025. And you can move forwards, that's okay. And so how are we doing against that? Well, the first thing to say is we've powered our network, which is our biggest energy footprint, with 100% renewable electricity, where we operate and manage the network since 2015. So about 70% of the total network that O2 runs for its customers is managed and operated by us, and the additional 30% are a mast placed on landlord farm, or it could be a landlord in a city. And the job now is to transition that total network, and we've completed 500 site surveys this year, so we're making really great inroads there. We've signed up to the Science Based Target Initiative, and we're working with the Carbon Trust on our approach to net zero to make sure we're really pushing our standards to the highest possible degree. On building a greener society, I mentioned our supply chain target. So this year we were reaccredited to the highest standard again from the Carbon Trust. So we're continuing to try to push that, and hopefully we can exceed that target. And on building a greener society, I mentioned our O2 Recycle and O2 Refurb, but another big area of O2 is that we're more than just mobile and more than just consumer. We have a big Internet of Things business and a big B2B business. And we have installed over 3 million comms hubs for smart meters across the UK. So, our SIMs and connectivity can power everything from smart meters to the digital signs that you see on bus shelters to, mobile card readers. And we've been recognized for the 6th year in a row as the best managed IoT service provider by Gartner. But particularly on smart metering, Smart Energy GB has said that 11% of the goal, the contribution to reach our net zero target in the UK by 2050 can come from household energy savings, like smart metering. So it's a really interesting opportunity for us. And then the final one is on digital workplace. So a lot of the products that we sell for our business customers enable flexible working. And obviously it's been well reported, the environmental impact of flexible working during COVID. And O2 really has walked the walk on digital working and flexible working. And we've been doing that since 2008 as well. So if we move forwards. So so I've captured a little bit about our history and our present challenges. If we look forwards, we believe that there's a great potential for mobile to enable other sectors. And so the GSMA and the Carbon Trust created this paper, which talked about the carbon savings from the mobile sector, and they estimated that the use of mobile technology created a global reduction of greenhouse gases of around 2.135 million tons of CO2 in 2018. And this year we also created a paper called A Greener Connected Future. And we looked at how 5G and the Internet of Things can enable decarbonisation across a number of different sectors, from energy to transport to manufacturing. And for manufacturing, we said that we could see a saving of 40 megatons of carbon being delivered by 2035. So there are many ways, obviously, that connectivity is and can create greater efficiencies, whether that's controlling energy use, creating greener transport, powering smart cities, or offering customers more environmentally friendly choices. We're involved in a number of exciting consortiums. For example, on the top, this is a consortium up in the West Midlands called Spring, where we're using 5G as a test bed, and we're inviting innovation ideas for people to come up with environmental use cases for 5G. We're the connectivity partner of the Smart Mobility Living Lab, which is looking at transportation solutions, about how automation can drive improvements on traffic flows, traffic lights, infrastructure to help reduce air pollution and CO2 emissions. And also an ADEPT pilot where we're using our motion data, which is anonymized mobile movement data, to help with city planning. Okay, thank you. So some lessons from our journey is, number one, if we want to support our goals, we really need to start with our people. So responsibility is a core pillar of our plan. It's one of the 4 pillars, and we have executive KPIs related to performance against that. All employees have an annual objective to support our blueprint, and again, that's linked to performance and remuneration. We have good governance, where we have something called a business task force, which is made up by senior leaders across, and they are really responsible for driving the action of the plan. And so that it's not just something that is run out of a small CSR department, it's very much a shared plan. And finally, we actively engage our people. So we have a number of networks already, like LGBT network, Women's Network, and this year we created something called the Greener Network, and we have 500 people who all contribute ideas, best practice, and things like volunteering ideas. So we're really winning the hearts in that regard. The second learning is really establish where are we, and so and where do we want to be. So we pulled together some frameworks from across the industry, leadership frameworks, including some criteria that we collated from best practice in the sector to look at, the criteria for being a beginner, performer, leader, and a pioneer. And, some of the questions that you can ask in that process is, are you just doing the basics of mitigating material issues for a minimum, just for legal requirements? Are you integrating sustainability into your products and services? Are you marketing around it to drive behavior change? Is your CEO an advocate? Are your employees targeted and remunerated on it? Or with the best practice, like the IKEAs, are you putting it at the heart of your business? So the final learning on the final slide is that we're all very much in this together. This is a shared problem that we face, and for us, whether it's in terms of our capability of enabling other sectors with our digital, or whether it's through helping other businesses looking to get onto the journey for net zero with our experience, collaboration is key. So we've created 4 bits of content recently that I just wanted to talk about. The first, net zero white paper, our experience and how others can set their own targets. We created something called the Green Savings Calculator, which enables customers to look at the impact of flexible working on productivity, cost, and environmental savings. There's various bits of content that we did for a Blue Door Expo, and we created this thought leadership paper around a greener connected future, which talks about the role of 5G and Internet of Things in other sectors. So just a few things there. They're discoverable through our corporate handle or through our Blueprint web pages. Thank you very much for the opportunity. It's great to be amongst peers talking about these really important issues, and I look forward to the panel.
Thanks, Will. I'm just letting Anna back in so she can take over. Sorry, you can see my notifications there.
Hi, here I am again. Thank you so much, Will. It's been really interesting to hear more about the journey you guys have been on. It sounds like you've covered a lot of ground, from kind of like changing your direction on or kind of like evolving your work from social impact to also kind of including environmental impact. I think in the panel, I've already got some questions at hand in terms of wanting to hear a little bit more about like how you guys have brought about that change. I think before we do that though, I thought I'd quickly mention the poll. So obviously the votes have come in. We asked the question, which purposeful action do you think your organization must focus on first in 2021? And there is a pretty clear winner, which is integrate the purpose into the core business practices. So I think this is also kind of resonating what we heard from Lubomila and from Will in terms of making this more central to the agenda of the whole business and the purpose. I think it will be really interesting to hear from the panel later how what kind of like the organizational things are that need to have to fall into place to actually make that possible. I think the second runner-up around measuring success beyond profit is also really important. I think that might be also like a key for how you could bring around that kind of change in an organization by business or kind of perhaps measuring people's progress against goals beyond profit. To kind of motivate the leadership, for instance, in an organization to kind of work towards that. So anyways, interesting what the results are. Now I'd like to introduce you to Payal. Payal is our principal for service design at Idean. She's part of our leadership team and an all-round badass. She will tell you all about of her take on this question around putting purpose into action within an organization, and she's been around the block, so I'm sure she has some good stories to share.
Brilliant, thank you. I was hoping someone would yell from the ether. So I mean, it's to begin with, it's an interesting forum to be part of. It's really amazing to come after Lubomila and Will to be talking about some of the things that you see implemented effectively for us client side. But I think it's also given me a chance to the shape of the organizations that we work with at Idean, the materiality of the organizations that we seek to serve, but also the organization that we become. And I think this part navel gazing, part introspective exercise has actually given me a lot of food for thought. So I'm hoping that this sets us up for the panel discussion as we go into it. But a lot of what comes here is stuff I've been reading about and introspecting on the materiality of organizations. So let's see how it goes. I think one of the things that I'm most mindful of, having been a part of far too many transformation projects, is that transformation isn't enough anymore. And I think when we talk about turning purpose into action, perhaps this is a call for a broader ambition, a larger ambition that potentially starts talking about a new form of semantics, really, about what emergence could mean in organizations and what radical emergence could do for us. Should we start thinking about purposeful action as we go along? I think when we talk about organizations, we almost always start thinking about it in the private sector. But I think let's let's think of it as a corporation that can exist in the public or the private or the non-profit sector. But I think no matter how big or small you are, what form of a corporation you are, I think it needs a shake-up. And I think that shake-up needs to come from those people who live within, who hold the power, and often they're not the people on the top, because that's where we can assume responsibility. But I think every one of us has that responsibility to start moving things along. Now, while that's a great ambition, that's a nice thought. That's an easy one to go to bed with. I think the problem really is in the system. I think the most actionable purpose, but the most purposefully aligned actions still pander back to one key indicator that defines what success looks like. You can be a part of a local council, but you're still determined, your success is still determined on how much money you save. You can be a part of a huge organization. Your success still is dictated by tomorrow morning. And I think as a system, we haven't managed to change very much. And that in that very root of how corporations are formed lies the challenge ahead for all of us in terms of how do we actually turn the purpose that we hold so true in our organizations or our corporations, and how do we translate that into action that has any meaning in the future? I think one of the things that's growingly important for all of us is an economic system that talks about exponential growth, and we talk about growth a lot. We talk about growth a lot within Idean, within Capgemini, and we hear our clients talk about growth of products, of services. I think it doesn't work on a planet that's fixed in scale and skewed massively in opportunities. It just does not add up. And I think, therefore, is to understand that materiality of the resources that we still seek to use, but how we choose to make conscious attempts to use them in a manner that it benefits all. As I've been thinking about this a little, I've been thinking about it from a complexity science perspective. Every now and again, I go down that big black hole, and I realize there's one word that sticks out for me, the word that is emergence. A word that effectively starts articulating for us what happens in complex forms. I think every corporation is a pretty complex form and is larger than some of its parts. And when these complex forms evolve, I think what becomes very important to remember for all of us who think this is beyond us is that they still evolve using very simple rules. And I think we all know we're all a product of evolution of a larger and a grander scale, but it all starts at a micro scale. And a accumulation of how these micro interactions build up is what complexity science calls emergence. I think what we have to be mindful of is that every one of those interactions matter. So it's not just about the strategy on the top. It's about every single action that we take that has to go back and align to that purpose that is set for an organization to move in a direction that begins to matter and begins to shape the nature of the organization itself. Today, I think what we all have to be mindful of is most of our organizations are set up in the world that was modernist, that was post-war. And that world was that of form following function. If you needed a certain number of people to do something, that was the form of your organization. But we don't live in that form anymore. I think we're in a postmodern world where we live in the form of an organization that is not that linear, not as structured as we knew it to be. And I think in this postmodern, sense of the organization that's trying to move in different ways to address many different things at one go, we need to start thinking about organizations that connect up differently. These organizations are what I like to think of as rhizomic organizations. So they're not, I'm going to start throwing some big words, but I'll explain them. They're not what I understand to be like arborescent organizations. So by arborescence, what I mean is they're not tree-like organizations where if that was a metaphor for that organization, which is it's hierarchical and there's a top and there's a bottom, disruption means death in those organizations, because effectively, if you're using the metaphor of a tree, if you cut the trunk, that's it, you're gone. If we talk about disruption, not just of our own organizations, but also disruption at a scale that saves a planet, we need to start moving towards an organization that's connected up completely differently. That's not arborescent. That's actually rhizomic, where you have different nodes that do different things that still add up to a whole. And I think there's something really interesting to start exploring in that world that really allows us to start thinking about things beyond transformation. I'm sorry, but my slides are stuck, so I'm going to try and go beyond these animations as quickly as I possibly can. I think after that awkward pause with the animations, what this really leads me to is the responsibilities when you go into a rhizomic structure is that the responsibilities really lie with everyone, and they go a lot deeper. And in order to have responsibilities that are beyond economic responsibilities, that are environmental, that are social, that are often political, which obviously straddle the three, one begins to move towards a newer emergence. I think most organizations can have very different purposes, and I don't think we can suggest there's only one that one should be focusing on at one point in time, because a lot of what we want to try and do is be part of a future that tackles all of those concerns that we all have today for ourselves and our children. But I think thinking about what changes the shape of these organizations that lets us do all of those things that turns purpose into action, I've tried to put down 7 odd things that I think could get us there. Now, some of these are things that some of my peers on this panel have talked about as well. So I think alignment of incentives, honestly, is the biggest one. You often find when organizations get structured either in a hierarchical, linear, shoebox model, which is arborescent, you find that it's easier sometimes to align incentives, even though we know that that never really happens. When you start moving into a more multifaceted rhizomic organization, it becomes even more important to make sure that you don't create a push or a pull that takes you away from the goal that you've set ahead of the organization, and you start reducing complexity. You start introducing efficiency into complexity as you go along. The second thing that I think is really important is very, very clear objectives. Objectives are a very powerful tool to translate what is defined at the top into real action, but also for those who are potentially not seated at the top, to articulate what they can do to actually steer the strategy on the top. And I think one of the things we hold very dear at Idean is how much we focus on objectives, and I've seen the power of that, not just in building products and services, but also in how you shape a worthy organization. The third thing here for me is accountability, but honestly, accountability doesn't come without empowerment. I think it's important to align on incentives. It's important to define clear objectives, but then it's important to give people greater accountability, but also empower them to make purposeful decisions for the future. The fourth thing is something, again, reflecting back on what works for us at Idean, is hybridity, or what I guess in this world I'd like to think of as reaffiliated identities. If we want to try and do all of these things, we can't put people in boxes and assume that we will manage to do all of these things that align with the multiple purposes a corporation can have. We need to allow people to get out of the boxes that we put them in, so that they can actually bring all of themselves to work and effectively move towards the things they get out of bed every morning for. It's important for organizations to understand holistic personalities so that they can actually define what the purpose of the organization can be to drive better action. Authenticity, effectively, is just, I think this is just something that we should all be doing. And this is, I think everyone needs to start reflecting on what is it that we actually care about? Because I think there's a lot of box ticking exercise right now when we start thinking about purposeful action, and also when we start thinking about sustainability. There's a lot of greenwashing out there. And I think you can begin to see that pretty easily. I think consumers are very open at calling it out. And I think if an organization does not put effectively enough effort into being authentic, it is going to be seen through by users and consumers. Now, if you're authentic and you know what you stand for, you also need to be able to express it properly. I think communicating it really well internally as well as externally makes a big difference. Branding plays a big part in it. Marketing plays a big part in it. But effectively understanding which stories resonate with which audiences becomes one of the many little steps to a radical emergence. And last but not the least, I think living the values. I think we all have values on our walls, and we need to take them off them and start just living them. It will lead us to a world that is focused on well-being, sustainability, and equity if everyone made just that little effort moving towards it. After all, we are what we measure. I think we're moving into a world where this begins to change. If all of these things begin to add up, I fundamentally believe it will change the inherent nature of a corporation that we all form part of. And I think what we do can have a direct impact on not just our own organizational policy, but also public policy. I think, particularly in the case of O2, when you start seeing a massive telecom network make big strides towards social responsibility, you begin to see how in a pretty regulated space, you can start seeing a benchmark set for other competitors. And I think we have to believe that everything that we do brings us good within the corporation, but also brings the world some good and begins to affect policy, because we all have the power to lobby towards the world we want to live in. Of course, while we're at it, I like to do this every morning. I like to try and question the obsession with growth. I think we need to start thinking about what makes our services and our products, our businesses and our economies just better, not bigger. I think rethinking our measures of success overall will potentially get us there. But I think when we're translating purpose into action, growth is potentially, I wouldn't yet call it a dirty word, but I don't think it should be mentioned in the same breath, especially when we're talking about purposeful action. And I think taking that out of the mix can really help us make some very conscious decisions for what happens next. I'll leave this here. I think one of the things I am very mindful of is not all of us have a seat at every possible table. And I think that's all right. I think the power each one of us has is advocacy. I think no matter who we are, where we sit, we have the power. And I know that from working with our teams. At Idean, we don't change because some of us in the leadership team think we should change. We change because the people we work with, the people we work for, and the people who walk into our doors every day believe we should change. And I think every single decision, therefore, needs to be a discerning one, so that every single choice we make is one that's meaningful. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pal. I think it's been really, really interesting. I think particularly what you were talking about just now about aligning incentives and setting really clear objectives. I think that kind of is something that would be really interesting also to kind of hear later on in the panel in terms of how Lubomila has seen our organizations do this, but also how Will believes that this is something that is perhaps already underway at O2, or how that could be pushed further. At this point, though, I'd like to introduce Nazia, who's going to be joining us now and will be part of the panel. I should probably say Dr. Nazia, she specializes in systems thinking, and she's a founder and director of Resilience and Sustainability Development Program at the University of Cambridge, and she's also a fellow at the World Economic Forum. And she's advised over 20 countries on a wide variety of topics, including sustainable development and public policy upgrading. So I guess we just jump straight in. Given that, Kyle, you were the last one to talk, maybe we just start with you. I think it would be really great to hear from you. How do you think that some of the time frames that kind of CEOs and venture capital funds and PE investors have, they tend to be more in the sort of 2 to 4 year range in terms of looking ahead. Do you see that this is going to be changing going forward? And if so, how do you think you can kind of believe that organizations need to kind of make an impact on those timelines to kind of get more of those actions into practice faster?
It's an interesting question. So I think there are career CEOs and there are non-career CEOs. They're the ones who sort of move from place to place every 3 or 4 years, and that's a job someone's got to have. I think in that 2 to 4 year or 3 to 4 year horizon that most CEOs have to make a mark, unfortunately for them, that's what the shareholders expect is
I can. Oh, I got
is
it.
economic, like growth of an organization that is well calibrated at a financial level. And I think that's how the world works. And I think we have to understand that system to then work with it. But I think in my talking of the shape of the organizations, if we continue to be tree-shaped organizations, have that problem where, you know, you have career CEOs who come and go, who have 3 to 5 years to grow a company that's only focused on financial growth of a company. And we never really move to another model where anyone else has the power to shift things over a longer period in time. That said, things are changing. I think, I can't remember who it is, but I just attributed it to Jeff Bezos because it's easy to attribute most things to him. I think he talked about how companies that start working on horizons that are not the 18 months to 3-year horizon, but on long-term horizons, are going to do better. And I think there are going to be more of those companies because it is important to have that outlook. It's important to have that horizon being planned towards, even though there is a certain level of radical uncertainty that comes with it. And, you know, I am, amongst other things, reading Nassim Taleb, who, you know, begins to unpack that problem of what begins to happen when you plan for a world where you don't know what will happen tomorrow. And I think CEOs face that problem. So we'll see more companies looking at broader horizons, but the short-term gains are not going to go away overnight.
Nazia, actually, so welcome, first of all. Great that you managed to join us. Just to quickly kind of also get you part of the conversation, you mentioned you're obviously working with a lot of organizations to help them, you know, turn some of these goals into action. What is your, I mean, just what Kyle was sharing about kind of, you know, some of those time horizons being a bit tricky and making, you know, it being important that some of the key leadership team have incentives to kind of think more long term. What is your kind of strategy and kind of creating that change in organizations?
Thank you, Annika. And sorry, everyone, about the technological error, but I'm sure you appreciate how difficult it can become when we have planned the sequence and it goes out of loop. And that actually brings a very interesting way to answer Annika's question, because sequence is something that the leaders depend a great lot. And whenever sequence goes off, depending on the person, and especially since you asked me the question about leadership, it depends how resilient they are and how creative they are in adjusting their code of conduct and code of business. So when we're working with leaders, whether it's a public sector, private sector, or not-for-profits, because through Cambridge we have a huge access to, you know, diversity of decision makers. One of the biggest challenge we take them through is through a method we developed called Creative Idea Studio, where they try to imagine the future, what the best case scenario is about, and what is the worst case scenario. The way we do this is not the traditional scenario building exercise. We actually take a very novel writing approach. And the methodology is something that we borrowed from Disney's own work of how they develop with a lot of metaphors built into it. And they visualize the storyboard before they even go into drawing and production. So we actually do this similar kind of practice with leaders and decision makers to visualize their ideas across the future they think is the best outcome, and then create shocks and crises in the system, i.e. like what we just experienced, and try to enlighten them that what are the different moves that they can make with the given resources they have. And this is part of the research we do at Cambridge, is that the ability of decision makers to identify the fundamental capacities they have to protect at the time of shocks and crisis, so they can actually continue to perform with the critical capacities they need to have to sustain. And that's very important for businesses when it comes, because businesses will have a lot of activities and a lot of capacities, but when push comes to shove, there are probably a handful of items that the decision maker needs to have a key focus on. In your case, you are keen on the time management, and that's why this is where we jump right in and ask the question. But if there was a decision maker who did not have that kind of creativity and vigilance, they probably would have started from a different pace and would have kind of create a bit more ruffle in the structure that was laid out. So that's part of the kind of thinking we make visible through the research and the communication we try to do with our evidence base. Right now, I just use both of them. Thanks.
Cool. I think in terms of like creating some more of that visibility, I think that sounds like a really interesting strategy. I wonder at O2, how do you guys kind of do that? How do you kind of bring some of the impact to life for people so that it makes it easier for them to like make decisions and take action? I think somebody was asking, Jill was actually asking specifically also around how do you actually perhaps visualize and kind of bring to the forefront some of the impacts that go beyond your use of kind of sustainable resources, but actually also your customers and how they kind of act with your technology and products?
Yeah, it's a really good question, because we need to look at our total value chain, you know, not just downstream in the manufacturing, in our really wide range of suppliers that we have, also our own operation, and then the customers and their use of the tech. So it's a great question, and I think, you know, 90% of the emissions from mobile phones come downstream in the production, in the kind of mining and the kind of sourcing of the materials, etc. But it's a good point that, you know, there's a growing carbon footprint from customers' use of phones. Of course, there are many carbon savings as well. It's a really interesting question that we're discussing at the moment. You know, where does our impact start and stop? You know, what is within our kind of remit and control to be able to influence positively? You know, I think certainly we have the possibility of educating customers about how to make greener choices with the products and services that we sell. We can look also to promote, you know, more environmental solutions through things like O2 Priority. You know, of course, we can look to educate them about and partner with other businesses that, you know, offer more sustainable lifestyle choices with their tech. So
okay.
It's something we're definitely thinking about, and we will continue to think about.
Lubomila, I have a question for you actually, that kind of like is a good segue here, because I was wondering, with the kind of businesses that you're helping to reduce emissions, I heard that there was like even like by 50%, like what are your learnings from like what is the most successful way in achieving this in terms of like reducing that footprint overall? And what are perhaps some of the common mistakes companies make on that journey, potentially, if you also have that wisdom?
So we work with a wide-ranging types and sizes of businesses. We work with companies like BCG, we work with companies like BMW Foundation, but also with really small startups. So, and also football clubs. So, and everyone is kind of in a different manner successful. And it all depends on the buy-in that the management has made, and also the buy-in from the employees. As long as, I think it was mentioned multiple times during the presentations that they were given, sustainability, if done well, is not a top-down one-off campaign or just an initiative in the company. It's something that requires a longer-term commitment, but also an understanding of the repercussions that it's going to have on the business. So one of the best and most important aspects is get everyone involved, get everyone around the table, because they're going to contribute to the faster adoption of new ways of doing things and the new ways of operating and thinking. The common mistakes are when companies think that carbon neutrality is the end of the story, and they go through an exercise where someone calculates their emissions and they think they've achieved it all. I think what's missing here is the aspect of education. People don't necessarily know all the facts behind this label. They don't know the effort that it takes for a company that is really transparent, that has been actually understanding their scope 1, 2, and 3, and has been speaking to their suppliers and so on. And this is a lack of education, not on the company side, but just on a general level. I think we're still mixing up these concepts, and I stand behind the motivational speech that Payal gave at the end. I felt really motivated because these are the messages we preach as a company. It's really important for us to actually understand how big is the as we need to go through, and for companies to actually put this on top of the agenda, as we've heard O2 has done as well.
Yeah, actually, Kyle, what do you think is the best way of making sure that, or what do you think is like a strategy that people could pursue to bring some of those other measures of success higher up on the agenda, things that go beyond growth? You've obviously talked about how every morning you wake up and you want to like stop talking about growth and talk about like better, not bigger. Do you have any kind of recommendations for how I don't know, people within organizations can help bring about that change?
I'll be honest, I don't think we can go back to the drawing board and start from scratch. That's not the intention, as much as I may wake up for it every morning. I think what most organizations have and what effectively they can leverage. I think most organizations will continue to pursue growth, and that's okay, but we can still not go after. I think when it comes to other measures of success, it's important to figure out what one's purpose is and therefore how one measures it. And I think to start embedding those other measures of success, it starts at the smallest level. I think it's very small steps. As much as I think there are the grander steps that one needs to make. So we heard from IKEA, in the last session around how their country CEOs also have, if I've gotten the facts right, their country CEOs also have sustainability now in their title, so they are ultimately responsible for it, which is an incredibly noble way of starting to think about it. But I think just the country CEO cannot do everything. So you've got to embed it literally in the smallest possible team in the smallest possible way, so that everyone's objectives, everyone's incentives line up in order to create a sum that's larger than its parts. And I think those measures of success could be what is most authentic to that organization. They don't have to be the ones that, we can well sit and assume if they work for us, they work for someone else. Particularly, and I think particularly in the developing world, I feel pretty passionate about that, where I think, we can talk about cutting down our carbon emissions. And I think it's important for everyone to cut down their carbon emissions. It's another to say that to a tiny country in a developing world where you're just about getting out of abject poverty. And I think you need to start thinking that everyone does not need to cut down their carbon emissions in the same way across the world. I think there is a rebalancing of the system that is needed, and it needs to be led by people who have led so far. And I think that's why the responsibility lies with the leaders today.
Actually, just talking about, obviously, also looking at how this is maybe true for developing countries and how they can perhaps kind of build systems from the start to kind of like consider some of these questions. Nazia, I can imagine that you probably have quite a lot of experience with that in terms of kind of similar to the situation that we're in right now with COVID, where people are talking about building back better. Maybe in like emerging economies, it's more around actually like setting the foundations from the start to be, kind of driving the right kind of actions and decisions in organizations and governments. But do you have any wisdom to impart here in terms of, like, I think Daniel was actually asking if there's a silver bullet that potentially would unlock necessary corporate action on climate change? What is your perspective on that?
Very good question. Whenever we hear silver bullet, we get very nervous, and we really try to say there isn't a silver bullet. But what I do believe, though, there is a golden thread. And thread is very important because it can snap, but if you hold it tight, it can really, put together many, many aspects that are connected. And this is where what Payal said, what each of you have actually said, are actually quite interesting, because they are the silver bullets in and of themselves that need to be pulled together. And what is this golden thread? Good governance. And along with this one golden thread, there's a silver thread. That is the sustainable investment. That's come in the fact of that having a long-term vision of any investment that comes through. And the third bit is the bronze thread. That is the responsible innovation. Any innovations that comes into society that is claiming to do good or solve any kind of problem or services needs to have a vision of responsibility. So just by having a good company with a good CEO, with a good vision and a mission is not good enough until, as Lubomila, if I have pronounced your name correctly, you talked about education. And that's what it boils down to, the educating everyone within the customer base, within the supply chain, within the secondary organizations, i.e. not-for-profit, who are not part of the main set of network but have influence, to also have the same level of understanding what is responsible, what is sustainable, and what's good. And those are the three threads I would advocate that any organizations that is committing itself to become a sustainable and resilient institution going forward should actually have a command on, an intellectual command on, not just write fluffy, literatures and reviews and insights notes, but actually commit themselves to actually educate themselves, because these are very complex and they are irreducible. In other words, you cannot, I underline this even as an economist that I was trained in, you cannot reduce them to a smallest part and then say that this is not the grand picture. And we have to have that kind of commitment going forward if we want to build back better. So that would be my message.
Thank you. We have a question from Vaskor around the link between corporate or environmental sustainability and responsibility and the performance in terms of profitability, and how this can be measured. And do you have any kind of recommendations for how these measurements can potentially help to create more visibility of some of these impacts in kind of like in terms of sustainable impact of actions, etc.?
Is that to me?
Yes, sorry, I was just following up on what you're saying. Yes.
Oh, okay. Okay, great. So very important question. So we run 3 research track. One is on good governance, second is on sustainable investment, and third is responsible innovation. As I mentioned, those 3 are my gold and silver and the bronze thread. In the question that your audience has asked is fundamental to each of these research track, where we're trying to match the interest of the consumers, the businesses, and the governments to sustain within their own domain of operation. This is where system thinking become very interesting and important for those of you who are actually leading organizations. Because as any organization, as an entity, while Will has talked about in greater detail with what the work this O2 is doing, Lubima talked about the work that they are doing with the institutions who are their customers. And of course, Payal has nailed a lot of the important concepts. But what is missing is that standardization. We a lot of time depend on voluntary announcements of what good we are doing. And there are typologies that are like overwhelming. Even us we are okay with lots of different ideas and typologies, we are overwhelmed with the sustainable investment domain of typologies that are coming out from the EU, the UK. Each institutions, each companies have their own product managers are coming up with the new labels, and the advertisers are doing new code words. What is missing in this case is that it's not about you coming up with another variables, but finding the right measurements that are both have some kind of regulatory backing. So in other words, by customers saying, just because you said you have this eco labeling, you are really eco if you go down to the value chain. The second one is that authenticity. Authenticity in doing business in a way that is more holistic, not only from the global value chain perspective, but from the environmental and social good point of view. I think that's a very important authenticity that needs to be outlined. And we work very closely with investors and investees who are trying to claim the territory of sustainable investment on how to become authentic. And the third thing, and this is the critical one, as I mentioned earlier, is the good governance. What are the variables you're using to demonstrate good governance? Female representation, diversity representation, orientation, education, knowledge, and in fact, as small as the maternity leave are some of the important variables that can be used to demonstrate your company's sustainability approach. So in a broader space, sustainability should not be reduced. Again, the word I'm using cannot be reduced just to an environmental outcome or climate change agenda. It has to be broadly spoken from the dimension of society and the governance within the space of investments and the investor's interest, and the technology and the role of technology in solving certain problem that your organization whichever whether it's a public or a private or a not-for-profit are trying to solve.
Cool, thank you. I actually was wondering, maybe another question for Lubomila. I'm aware that you probably have to leave soon. So I just want to make sure we ask a good question for you. What do you think are the greatest challenges in the near future? What keeps you up at night?
Fantastic way to end. I think what keeps me up at night is what remains unseen for most of the people on this planet. I think we're still scratching the surface when it comes to sustainability and also this fundamental shift that we're seeking to achieve, and is the reason why we're having this discussion. Through the Green Tech Alliance, on a daily basis, we start working and we onboard in the community tens and on a monthly basis, hundreds of different startups from all over the world who are facing different types of climatic challenges and are finding different ways to address this. What keeps me up at night is the fact that we're still not able to have a mutual definition of what problem we're solving, and also a unified understanding of the fundamental challenge that humanity is facing at the moment. I fully agree with all the statements that were made about like how important it is to empower your employees, how important it is to like link it to profitability, to have the right metrics. But what's also still the reason why we are using these types of evidences is because there's no alignment in the fact that climate change is an existential issue for humanity. And I think this is what keeps me up at night, and I hope through positive messaging and kind of a good understanding of who should be your partners in this battle, we're going to get to a really good standing, but there's still a lot of work to be done.
Thank you. I think we had one other last question potentially for Will. On this kind of challenge, like the one that Lubomila also was just describing about the fact that there is no set path for how to tackle this as an organization. How are you guys going about it at O2? Are you kind of looking to strengthen your capabilities internally? Are you using like experts in the field? Like how are you kind of shaping your approach to this?
Well, I mean, you know, constant improvement for sure, setting stretching goals. And being open and transparent about it. You know, we work with some great partners. So Sue Garrard, who created Unilever's Sustainable Living Plan, offered us the consultation on our own responsible business plan. So for anybody who's looking to create their own plan, you know, get somebody who's done it inside business would be a good recommendation. We are working with partners. You know, the Carbon Trust is a sort of not-for-profit organization that holds us to account. You know, we report publicly. But I think to the point of kind of internal and how we're driving it, I think that some of the comments about lack of education is absolutely spot on, you know, and I think we have to do a better job of understand the basics of climate change, demystify net zero, carbon neutral, all of that sort of stuff. And particularly in our business where there's huge potential growth area from Internet of Things and digital, you know, it's a new skill set that people need, because at the moment it's just the domain of salespeople and engineers who are used to selling products for the same reasons. So we need kind of innovation and real understanding of the issue.
It sounds like earlier also about education. I think this is going to be an important theme as well, to kind of like make that you have enough skills around the organization to kind of like make that happen. At this point, I think thank you so much for all your contributions and for bearing with us with all these like technical hiccups. So thank you, Will, Kyle, Nazia. Lubomila also had to just pop out. Thank you so much for everybody's contribution and the fantastic discussion. What is left for me to say is that obviously we would love to continue the conversation with all of you. We have a bunch of roundtables in the new year that we're lining up where we can have you know, more sort of intimate conversations, usually with like 5 to 6 people or so, and kind of pick up this topic of sustainability going forward. We also would love to invite you to kind of get in touch with us sustainability@idean.com. You can reach out and we can continue the conversation. And of course, all of the social channels that I mentioned earlier are also still available. So yeah, that's it. That's it for tonight. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming and for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night. Bye.